Across the U.S., millions of people are being uprooted from their homes and forced to migrate, not because of war or economic hardship, but by the climate. Between rising sea levels, submerging coastal communities, and towns being destroyed by severe weather, millions are being forced to say goodbye to their homes in search of safety and stability. But what exactly does it mean to be a climate migrant?
Climate change, the disasters, the extreme conditions that we're already experiencing and which will get worse. And I'm talking about things like more violent storms, extreme flooding, extreme and chronic heat, drought, which affects crops and pushes up food prices. Fire is another one. All of these will exacerbate the conditions under which people live and make places more and more unlivable and push them to move.
That's Gaia Vince, science writer and author of Nomad Century: How Climate Migration Will Reshape Our World. According to a report by the First Street Foundation, it's estimated that 3.2 million Americans are already climate migrants, and that number is expected to keep rising. But many of these people don't even realize they fall into this category.
Quite often they will see themselves not as climate migrants, but perhaps as economic migrants or people who have moved for other reasons, to get a different job. I've met many communities from rural places where they've moved to the city in order to get jobs. But actually, if you dig it a bit deeper, the reason they've made the move is because they've had chronic drought, which has affected the agriculture there. And even if they're not directly farmers or not directly living off their agricultural production, just being within that community becomes harder and harder because there's a lot less money to go around. And so other entrepreneurs also find it more difficult.
While some don't know their status, others are very aware of their precarious situation. One example is Patrick Garvey, a climate migrant from the Florida Keys. In 2013, Garvey bought Grimmel Grove, a neglected tropical fruit grove on the island. He had hopes of turning it around and growing fruits rare to the U.S. But as soon as his business took off, Hurricane Irma swept in.
August 2017, we finally had our first profit, and 10 days later, Hurricane Irma destroys the property, the business, and my personal life.
Though Garvey escaped the hurricane physically okay, the same can't be said for his property. After sheltering at a nearby school during the storm, he returned home to find wood and metal strewn everywhere. His grove was destroyed, and most of the trees were now bare stumps. While many of his friends and neighbors left the Keys for good, Garvey relocated within the archipelago. He also rebuilt his business, but it took a very long time.
The hurricane affected the whole dynamic of the Keys, population-wise, housing-wise, cost of living increased. For the Keys, for the longest time, affordable housing is typically having a trailer. And once that trailer is destroyed in a hurricane, you cannot put a trailer back. It has to be a single family residence, which is, a lot more money to be able to put in. So a lot of people left.
Unfortunately, many Americans can relate to his experience. Hurricanes are wiping out communities along the East and Gulf coasts. Tornadoes are ravaging the Midwest and South, and wildfires are becoming more frequent and deadly in the West and Northwest. On top of that, extreme heat is also making some of the nation's largest cities unlivable.
There is a survivability limit, which is the temperature at which a young, healthy person who is not doing any physical activity will die within 6 hours. Now, that human survivability limit had not been exceeded anywhere on Earth until about 5 years ago, when it was first experienced in Oman in the desert. It's now been experienced in the United States, in several places around the world, and that's only going to increase. There are already cities in the US which are essentially in unlivable zones. I mean, Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, they're only made livable because of huge amounts of adaptation of these air-conditioned units. And that's fine for a very small, wealthy population, but it does rely on having huge access to energy.
And while there are many Americans who've moved to cooler, more stable climates, there are others who want to, but can't.
what ends up happening is you get this kind of climate apartheid where the wealthy people can actually afford to migrate to safety and to better conditions. And the poor people become stuck because they can't afford to move. The value of their property is diminished and they can't afford to buy elsewhere. And at the same time, the whole neighborhood starts to deteriorate in value for these kind of accumulative reasons. And that's something that really governments and city planners need to get on top of.
Currently, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, provides financial assistance to people impacted by natural disasters. However, the average payout is only $3,000 and can take months to receive. And there's no preventative assistance program to help those in high-risk areas relocate somewhere else before disaster strikes. For these reasons, many in the climate community are advocating for managed retreats, or strategic planned relocations of people and infrastructure. While this may seem like a perfect solution, it requires both funding and transparency from government officials.
We need honesty from leaders about what New York City will look like, what Seattle will look like, what Las Vegas, New Orleans, Los Angeles, what will they look like in 2040? What will they look like in 2060? What are we expecting to see, those conditions in those places? And then we need to have discussions about how we manage this and how we plan for it. And that will involve moving people, investments, industry, agriculture. You know, this is not just a migration of a few individuals. This is a migration of capital, of resources, of everything.
Sadly, the Florida Keys are one of the places experts recommend for a managed retreat. If sea levels keep rising, the islands are expected to be non-existent in just a few decades. Garvey knows he may become a climate migrant once again, but he's not giving up hope just yet. After rebuilding Grimmel Grove, he decided to join the fight against climate change by growing breadfruit. These trees can not only survive harsh climates, but absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. For him, it's a reminder that there are solutions to this crisis.
Breadfruit is a tree that is disaster resilient. It was one of the few trees that survived the hurricane. And it also sequesters more carbon than any other staple crop in the world. So it actually helps mitigate the global warming. So that's kind of been my focus, is to kind of create a positive or something for the future.
The fight to minimize climate change is solvable, but there's a clock counting down. Every year without change will bring a larger number of climate migrants and new challenges. To find out more about Gaia Vince, Patrick Garvey, and all of our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can find Vince's book, Nomad Century: How Climate Migration Will Reshape Our World, on Amazon.com, or request copies to be stocked at your local bookstore. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.